very much.
You found $70 million in the couch?
No. We didn't find the money. We just found ways not to have to spend. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for being here on Holy Thursday. And lest I forget, I want to wish everyone a very blessed Easter. I want to talk today about a couple of items. One is the $70 million in cuts that we have to address in the current fiscal year coming out of the special session. And then I also want to talk a little bit about capital outlay going forward. And then we will take questions after that. So today I'm announcing how we're going to make the final $70 million in budget cuts for the current year. As you know, the legislature worked with me to address more than $880 million of the $950 million budget deficit that the previous administration left us when we came into office in January. I had proposed a plan to fix all of the $950 million deficit, and my plan included more than $170 million in cuts to state government. So the $70 million represents the cuts the legislature did not address during the special session in order to finish balancing our budget. I want to thank my Commissioner of Administration, Jay Darden, and his staff, as well as the Department of Health and Hospitals and Secretary Dr. Rebecca Gee and her staff for their tireless work to make these final cuts this year as strategic and efficient as we can so that we can best serve the people of Louisiana and avoid unnecessary pain. The fact of the matter is DHH is going to bear all $70 million of these cuts. I could not in good conscience put another cut onto higher education and on the backs of college students after 8 years of the deepest cuts to higher education in the state of Louisiana in terms of the state cuts in state general fund that exceeded those of any other state in the country. Also, I was mindful of the $28 million that I directed the universities and community and technical colleges to absorb from this top shortfall, which operated as an additional cut upon higher education in the current year. So this $70 million left in cuts to make before June 30th will look as follows. $30 million will come from savings that we now believe we are able to realize for the first time after our first full year standing up of our new private insurance plan for coverage for most of our Medicaid clients under Bayou Health. $10 million in efficiencies we are seeing in the first few months that I've been in office because I have directed DHH to run a more efficient department. We are seeing better, more cost-effective monitoring of who is a Medicaid client now, and we're making sure that we capture all insurance reimbursements that we can to pay for services that we give to our people. And then $30 million in savings that will include cutting every DHH contract with public-private hospitals by 1.5%, cutting other DHH contracts, accepting a public-private hospital offer to make payments to them under the better enhanced Medicaid expansion federal match rate, and cutting rates we pay to Bayou Health managed care companies. I want to point out that with respect to this, we are cutting what we pay these managed care organizations down to the minimum amount that CMS will allow. Within an actuarial range, CMS, we're currently paying 50%. CMS will allow a reduction to 7%, and that's what we're going to pay. So this will be the most efficient, leanest Medicaid program that we are allowed to run by CMS. So these cuts certainly are not easy to make, but they will help finish out our responsibility to the people of Louisiana this year to balance our budget and to prioritize a more stable government going forward for our citizens. I do want to remind you that we still face an additional $750 million cut to the state budget for next year that starts July 1st. That's relatively good news, I guess, because when the administration started in January, we had a $2 billion problem for next year. but $750 million. I want to share with you a bold step that I'm taking as we change the way that we fund building and construction projects in the state. We are taking a radically different approach to developing capital outlay this year. We have removed more than $1 billion from the capital outlay bill by not reauthorizing much of the Priority 5 projects that typically are simply automatically reauthorized each year. And I want to tell you why I'm doing that. First, I made a commitment during my campaign to be realistic with our state's construction dollars, to focus on fixing our roads and taking better care of state buildings, and to stop over-budgeting our capital outlay bill with projects that we tell people back home are in line to be funded, but which in reality have little hope of ever being funded. Just one example of how broken our capital outlay system is back in December, for the first time in 30 years, we as a state had to make a short-term loan just to have the cash to continue projects that are already in progress. We didn't want to sell bonds because I suspect we didn't want our credit worthiness evaluated at the time. But that's not the way to do business. It is not appropriate to have projects in the capital outlay bill that add up to hundreds of millions of dollars beyond what the bonding capacity of the state of Louisiana is. So we're going to projects that advance our greatest needs as a state, our most important infrastructure, and take care of long overdue deferred maintenance that we need for our state buildings. We're going to continue to evaluate projects to determine what can be accomplished with existing funding. And so I am only recommending an amount of projects for Priority 1 funding. Those are the cash lines of credit, or Priority 2 funding that will fit within what we know realistically as a state we can sell bonds to finance. We will sell bonds this fall and next spring. As you know, we recently had our state's credit rating downgraded by Moody's, and they further put us on a negative watch going forward. They did this based on the budget problems of the state of Louisiana. So this means that estimated future annual bond sales are more limited than we would want them to be. This impacts the number of building projects the state can realistically afford to fund. And so that means we're going to start being realistic, like any business under the circumstances would be, about what we can afford and what we can't. And we are not going to make empty promises to the people of Louisiana. We're going to put more than $80 million into projects that specifically build and fix our roads. That is a long-time priority for us. That is something that I said I would do in the campaign. We're going to put a significant amount of money towards major repairs and deferred maintenance on our state buildings, both state agencies, buildings, as well as higher education. This includes a lot of roof repairs to state buildings, and particularly those on our university campuses around the state. And I am making the decision not to build new buildings and put them on our college campuses and elsewhere, because those buildings, even though they're new and they're shiny and they're nice, they visit additional operational costs upon all of those universities and community colleges and technical colleges, and quite frankly, they don't have the ability to absorb those costs right now, so it just doesn't make sense to do that. So we're going to move forward responsibly and in a transparent manner with respect to the way we move forward with capital outlay in this state. We're going to stabilize our budget and prioritize taking care of our most important resources and our most important needs. We'll focus on what matters in this state and build a strong future going forward. So that, in a nutshell, is what I'm proposing with respect to the $70 million in cuts and with respect to the capital outlay bill to the legislature. And at this point, as I indicated, I'm happy to take some questions. Yes, sir.
In November, DHH came to the legislature and informed them there was a $180 million shortfall in the Medicaid program. And now you're saying they found $30 million in savings. So I'm just curious about how we've seen such large swings.
Well, what I know the first shortfall was a failure to account for any increase in Medicaid utilization. I can tell you that DHH found a fix to that problem, but then the administration took the fix away from them to solve other problems and left them with the problem. When you have an agency in state government that spends $8 billion a year, they constantly do cash management monitoring, and even small differences can make a major impact on the budget, whether it's good or bad. I can tell you, for example, this year, one of the ways we know that we can save money, or we currently believe we can save money, is the flu problem wasn't as bad as we thought it would be and had prepared for. Now that's in contrast to recently when we had a much worse flu season that visited a lot more costs on us. So that is one of the ways. But I can just tell you that DHH monitoring the cash flow and looking at cash available and expenditures that they have to make now have found those savings. Yes, ma'am.
The cuts to the public-private partnerships, it
Mhm.
looks as though you're saying that the partners came to the table and they want to take that cut, is that right? And will they reduce some services for that?
Well, I don't want to say I don't want to act like they were happy about the cuts. They were not. I think they understood the size and scope of the problem. And when we called each of those partners to tell them what their cut was going to be, they were relieved because they knew that it could have been far worse. We do not anticipate any major reductions in services between now and June 30th as a result of these cuts. And they are relatively limited at 1.5% per entity, per hospital, I should say. Yes, sir.
So, one of the running themes even under your predecessor was the concern of cuts and the pain that was going to be experienced by people. And during the time that you've been governor, there was great comment by your administration about the pain that could be felt by people because of the budget cuts. And it seems that here in the end, the pain's not felt that strongly. And that's what happened during the general administration as well. And I wonder if you're creating a situation where sort of the sky is falling, and the sky doesn't fall in terms of going ahead, as you say, $750 million ahead could be terrible, terrible.
Mhm.
You could say, well, we keep hearing this, and we have to find a solution one way or the other to avoid terrible.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's a good question. As you know, the legislature worked with me ultimately to raise a significant amount of revenue in the current year to fix our problem. One of the things we had in the current year that's not available next year is $128 million from the Budget Stabilization Fund. That's not available next fiscal year. We had $200 million in BP non-coastal payments. We have $0 from BP for non-coastal payments coming next year. These cuts are not painless. We've done $170 million worth of cuts since I've become governor. There's nothing painless about any of those cuts. We could do better in every agency in the state of Louisiana without having to make those cuts. But at the same time, we have to be as smart as we can in how we move forward, allocate cuts, and that's what we're doing. I will tell you that none of these private partners will tell you that they can do their job taking care of their patients better as a result of these cuts. But so there is pain. But looking forward to next year at $750 million short, I would just ask you to stay tuned. Go to those appropriations committee meetings when agency heads and university system presidents and university presidents go in there and give their testimony about what they're going to have to do. Also understanding that unlike the previous special session where we raised revenue, there will not be revenue to be raised during the regular session. And so the testimony you're going to get is going to reflect their plans to address the cuts that they will be assigned. There will be nothing pleasant about that testimony, and you should also understand it won't just be testimony. They're going to be making plans to effectuate what they're saying in committee because they have to. Because any time that you have to make changes of this magnitude, knowing that, for example, you're either dealing with classified civil servants or you're dealing with tenured professors, or you have to make plans potentially for exigency and these sorts of things, you've got to put all of that into place well ahead of July 1st, which is the start of the next fiscal year. So I understand the question, Tyler. I will just tell you there is nothing painless about what we've done, and there is nothing painless about what we are about to do in the next session. Mark?
What's the status, two questions real quick, what's the status of next year's cuts? And I know you've been talking about they really got to get a plan in place soon, and they may not have time to wait for another special session. But what about passing a budget with contingency revenue and waiting for another special session before you start putting that plan for bad cuts
Yeah.
in motion?
Well, Mark, first of all, I have said that I'm not going to produce a budget that is contingent in any way. We're not going to have above the line and below the line items. We will have a budget that is based on the revenue that we have to incorporate into that budget based on the most recent revenue estimating conference. To do anything else, I think, is irresponsible. Secondly, this isn't even an odd-numbered fiscal session, odd-numbered year fiscal session where you can simultaneously pursue a budget and revenue-raising measures. So to say that we would have contingencies built into this budget would be doubly irresponsible, because any additional revenue will require another special session after the regular session is concluded. I don't believe it's in anybody's interest to go down that path. And I think it was a compound question. What was the second?
Yeah, what is the status of next year's cuts?
Well, we obviously are working on that, and I can tell you Jay has spent many hours, not just meeting with me, but meeting with agency heads. I spent 2 hours this morning talking to higher education. We will be producing for the House Appropriations Committee soon recommended amendments to the executive budget proposal that we made previously, because that budget was based upon a $2 billion shortfall. That shortfall in the state general fund is now $750. So however you want to think about it, we're either going to be adding revenue or we're just going to be allocating cuts, but certainly it's a better picture. But it is still very, very serious, and there is not a way to fashion a budget in the state of Louisiana that adequately funds what the vast majority of our people believe to be critical priorities if you're short $750 million. I will say this again, it won't be the budget that I wanted to implement, and in fact, I had a plan before the legislature that would have allowed us to move forward without these deep cuts. Unfortunately, we didn't do as well as we could have. We didn't do as well as we should have, and so we are going to go through this process, visit a lot of pain on the people of Louisiana, and that's why I am predicting that we will be back in a special session after the regular session to raise some more revenue. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, can you talk a little bit more to the importance of sparing higher education, especially when you're talking about the totality of it going to DHH? How can higher ed committee take part of it?
Well, first of all, I'll just revisit this point with you. Over the previous 8 years, higher education in Louisiana was cut in terms of state general fund support more than any other state in the nation. And we did cut higher education in the mid-year when I ordered that the top shortfall of $28 million would be absorbed by our universities. So even though I didn't want to, we have cut higher education in the mid-year. But all things considered, DHH was better positioned to absorb the cuts, both because of the way we were able to allocate cuts among our partners and our hospitals, but also because of the efficiencies that they developed and the way they were able to withstand those cuts. And nothing easy. I mean, hours and hours of work went into this, but we believe it is the most responsible, effective way to move forward and best serve the state of Louisiana. Julie?
The $30 million in savings from expenditures, is that all because of we haven't had a bad?
No. I think I gave that as an example of how we're doing that.
Okay. Is there some wiggle
Yes. Well, I don't want to say no new buildings. There are some projects that have reached the point where they're going to move forward, either because construction has started or perhaps because bids have actually been received and they came in at or below the projected expenditure. And so we're going to move forward with those. But I will tell you that there are many projects in the capital outlay bill presently that call for construction of new buildings that has not yet started, and it just doesn't make sense to move forward with that. And that's a conversation that I've had with higher education leaders, for example, around the state for some time, and then again as recently as this morning, to make sure that they're on board. I mean, it doesn't make sense to have to absorb these sorts of cuts in your operational budgets and then be forced to pay for, because even if you can just snap your fingers and give them a building without having to pay for the building, which is obviously not possible, but you put that building down on the campus, you then have to heat and cool it, you have to insure it, you have to staff it, you have to clean it, and so there are operational costs that visits upon them. And we are, at the same time, every campus, whether it's a community college or technical college, except for some of the newer technical colleges, obviously, or university, have lots of buildings with serious deferred maintenance needs, leaky roofs, and we know that especially now because of the severe weather we had a couple weeks ago. We had roofs across the state, especially on higher education campuses, that were leaking, that the leaks damaged computers and papers and just all sorts of things, just made it a miserable environment for our students to learn. And so I don't know why under all of these circumstances we would continue to build new buildings as opposed to repairing those that we have.
So the cutoff is if there's a bid that's come in and it's at cost or below, you've already bid the project, someone's already seen bids been accepted, those projects are moving forward.
I believe that.
There's only one.
Yeah, but I don't want you thinking there's a whole lot of that out there. There are most of the buildings that will go forward, for example, on college campuses in capital outlay, they're already under construction. I believe there is only one project where we're at the point where the bids came back in and they were at or below budget. In fact, it was below budget. And I will just tell you, this is on McNeese State University, and it is a building that's going to be constructed there. But beyond that, we don't see any additional projects for our college campuses. So, for example, I don't want anybody here thinking that we're not going to finish the engineering building at LSU. We are. It's under construction. There are buildings like that at Southeastern and elsewhere.
One more question, last one.
Yes, ma'am.
You talked about, you spoke of higher education today. A lot of parents and students are worried about the TOPS program going forward. Was the TOPS program discussed?
Yeah.
Any suggestions of possibly changing requirements discussed?
No, we didn't. There were discussions about TOPS. There were not discussions about changing the requirements to qualify for TOPS. But we did talk about the fact that by operation of rule promulgated by LOSFA, that is in fact what happens if we don't appropriate enough money to cover the full cost of TOPS, which this year is right at $300 million, and $238 million of that would be state general fund dollars. And when you're short $750 million state general fund, it is very difficult to see how we can finance the full general fund component of TOPS. So if it's not funded in full, the rules that we have in place require that these TOPS scholarships be awarded by ACT score, and within the ACT score to the students who can demonstrate financial need. And so that was discussed. There is tremendous concern about TOPS, and I will tell you, I support the TOPS program. I don't want to make any cuts. That's why I asked the legislature to pass, that's one of the reasons, that I asked the legislature to pass the balanced set of bills that we introduced into the special session. Ultimately, they didn't go as far as we needed to go. And so, like many other priorities in the state of Louisiana, TOPS is certainly at risk. That brings me no joy, And I will tell you, we're going to have another opportunity down the road to create the revenue necessary to fully fix the TOPS program. I'm going to keep working on this. But in the meantime, we have a very difficult job ahead of us to allocate these limited dollars across a multitude of priorities, and TOPS is one of those. So with that, nope, y'all heard her. That was the last question. But I want to thank y'all very much for being here. I want to wish you all a great Easter. Have a good long weekend, and I look forward to seeing y'all next week.